Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Grappling Podcast, where we talk about grappling. This is one of your co-hosts, Matthew Bartman, and across from me is the other host of this podcast,
Levi Van Stappen.
All right, so today we have an interesting topic we hope that everyone will like, and we're going to be talking about some simple changes for big improvements that we felt in our game as we've been doing Jiu-Jitsu. Levi, actually, we should probably start with you. So what is...
Me?
All right, hold on.
I'll do it.
Okay,
I can do it.
I want to say, okay, so what is a big change or a simple change you had that really was a big aha moment for you?
Ooh. So I think one of the biggest ones for me, as far as like, I'll do something specific. The mount was a big one. In the beginning, a lot of people that I've worked with, and I'm sure many listeners as well can resonate with this, people felt a lot more comfortable in side control than mount. I think mount people felt very tippable with things like bridges,
you're saying from an offensive perspective.
Yeah, from an offensive perspective. Yeah, sorry. So from the top position.
Yeah.
Versus side control, you can kind of bear down a little bit, wait out, and you didn't feel like at any point, you're going to lose position.
Mm-hmm.
And this aha moment literally came maybe like 2 years ago. So it wasn't like one I had a long time. And it came in the form of Gordon Ryan's instructional. And the biggest issue I had from top position was that, like I said, many people get feared of getting bucked off or thrown off. And the simple fact of being not only parallel with my partner, but the moment a bridge were to happen, I would move myself perpendicular. That changed a lot for me.
Yeah.
So not only using my hands, but swiping my foot underneath. So from my perspective, looking down on my partner is bridging towards the right. So as they bridge towards the right, I took my right foot underneath their body and I post out with my head.
Essentially, the direction they're bridging, you post out with.
Yeah. So going off to the side was a huge thing. Like I used to roll this really strong guy, Goran, and
he sounds strong.
He's a
strong name.
He's like one of those things where like you watch like an anime and you think it's just this big scary guy and he's like this big like sweetheart basically. But he's just like strong as an ox. And when he would bridge, I mean, it just made it feel, I was a purple at that time, that I had no jiu-jitsu skills. Like, oh, here's my hands.
Just kind of get blasted
push.
right off. Yeah.
Like, you don't have mounts anymore. So once I started swiping underneath and pushing, it was almost like all of his pushing got nullified instantly. And it was like such a weird revelation where he's pushing, but it's literally, I changed my body positioning on top. And I think that was a huge thing. Instead of sitting strong and being on top and like pinning the hips, that anytime that bridge would happen, and most people only have one or two big ones in them, but those one or two big ones can completely change a match.
That right there is actually a good point to bring up, where sometimes when we're thinking about if they do A, then I'll do B, they don't have an unlimited set of A's to spend, and I think it's easy to forget that when you're like trying to make a game plan or trying to do something where you have someone does a big movement and you do a counter movement, but you're able to still square back up. That is like, they might only have a handful of those in them still, So that's actually, I think that itself is a really interesting revelation.
I think every jiu-jitsu athlete has like a street fighter energy bar, basically, where it's like any big moves take out a big chunk. And sometimes the gambles work really well. But if you and I have a 10-minute match, or, we've been rolling for 30 minutes in the evening, those big chunks might not be as fresh later on. So some of these big tactics athletically can work really well early on. But if those gambles don't pay off, then you're screwed. The problem is big people, or strong people, I should say, against very technical people, I should rephrase that. Strong people against, experienced jiu-jitsu people. It's always tough when we say technique should overcome strength until you have someone big.
Yeah.
That just throws you off. You're like, oh my gosh, my coach showed me this, this, and this. So this adjustment really kind of amplified back the power that technique can have in jiu-jitsu. And maybe not so much like leveraging a spot, but literally positioning myself in a weird way that like his bridge was going into no space.
Yeah.
So if I was maybe 100 pounds less than him, maybe it'd still be difficult. But he was probably about 60 pounds heavier than me, but I stayed on top. And the longer I can stay on top, the more I can wear them down and get my submission. So just even that little ability, I can't recall, I think it was Gordon Ryan's top pin instructional. And it was actually a technique I was going to brush over.
Yeah.
Like I was focusing more on the offense stuff. He had like this swipe under. I'm like, man, like it just didn't resonate with me until I reflexively did it rolling. And I was like, oh my God, this is like gold right there. So that was a big one that changed mount for me. That allowed me to stay in mount longer. That allowed me to amplify my mount game. And now it is where it is today off of one move. So
no, actually that is a good point as far as, I remember when you taught me that actually. Just because your analysis, I think, is spot on when you first start, especially in the gi. Side control feels like the place to be.
Bear down.
You feel like you're just like the strongest guy on the planet there. And then, and mount just seems like this thing you get either, you have a hard time getting to, right? Because as you're like sliding your knee over or whatever direction you take to get there, you end up just kind of losing your position. A knee, so somehow their knees are back in front of you and you're back into an open guard kind of situation. And no, that sideways thing that's been really, really good. I really like that one.
It's hard because I don't think from side control, maybe there is that much of a switch. Sometimes people switching into Kesagatami, or that scarf hold position, like maybe a little bit with stacking, but it wasn't as much as a bridge and going into the empty space underneath.
Yeah.
Was really, really fascinating. So I think, especially for someone who's very big and strong and they're used to throwing people off.
Yeah.
Especially if they're pushing more in the chest or pushing side to side. I've had people try to post their hand out or they're digging for an underhook or let's say a cross collar and then get thrown off. And it's like, they're not surprised because this person's 80 pounds heavier than them. But so I had a little bit of that, but it was an ego being a purple belt going, this guy's like a fresh blue belt. It's like, I should have the mechanics and the leverage to do something. But once I had figured that out or utilized it, I was like, oh yeah, it's game on now. Like I leveled up my mount. And then I think that's where I started conveying to more and more people, to really focus on their mount because people don't have those skill sets. So I'm not surprised when people go, mount's not really my thing. It's like, I don't blame you. If your coaches didn't really show or demonstrate something, or you haven't really put time to explore to something, like, yeah, it's only gonna be subpar. So I'm glad I have those things because I think I can just amplify for other students. Like, nope, this stuff really can work. We just have to throw a couple of adjustments at you. It should be okay.
Yeah, that's a good one. I really like that one.
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier. I'm like, yeah, that was technique wise was a big one. So what do you got?
So it's actually kind of funny. Yours was a mount, like being the aggressor. Mine was actually a mount defense maneuver.
Let's challenge it.
So it was actually kind of interesting. When, and actually this is something we've talked about and then I added one thing to it. Okay. So it is when their hips are low on you, you essentially use the elbow knee kind of escape and those types of things where you're trying to, instead of trying to lift them, you lift the leg, really is what it is, right? You try to get underneath one leg. But if their hips are higher on you, that's when you move to the kipping and the mermaid, right? So it gives you like a whole escape system that works back and forth. But then I had one more that I've added to it that I think works quite well. Cause I like to think I'm like decently good at getting out a mount for my skill level. But when they sit tall or if they're just like not budging and you need to create some movement, right? Or if they're really heavy on you, what I really like to do is do the 2-on-1 grip where you do 2 against their stomach, you pin the hand against their stomach. And then you start, if you bridge then from there, you probably won't pull off a trap and roll against somebody.
Sure.
So I don't really I try to, but I know that it's not going to work 90% of the time. But people do have to respond to it because if they don't, they will get trapped and rolled. Then their leg is light. And now depending on how high they are on you, you either go back to this beginning of the system. If their hips are a little bit low, that gives you the space to be able to get underneath their leg, do an elbow knee kind of escape. If they're really high on you, you can kind of blast out the side and do kind of like a side kipping motion. And then you are left with a leg lock or you can wrestle up from there. So that actually, just that system like really opened up, I feel like, my mount escaping quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the key word that you just said there was system. And I think a lot of people from the bottom of mount or bound positions try to execute one technique and they assume like, I'm going to do the technique and that should be the end all be all. But I think probably a better word is a system that primes someone for your technique. Like you have to prime the situation to be optimal for an elbow escape. So you could go for something like a kipping escape and then someone sits down from it and now you have an elbow escape. So it's like being a boxer, you need 4 movements to combo together, and eventually one of them gives. So I like how you articulated that, because I think from someone in the bottom position, now you're more focused on weight distribution, right? Where people are moving, and not so much like, oh, I have to do this technique and then feel horrible when it falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did kipping escape, like, oh, it's not working. Like, oh, there went my move.
Yeah.
And it's like, escapes aren't one move things. Like they are 2 or 3 done very well.
Yeah. And this right here also kind of an interesting thing I haven't considered too much. So for the elbow knee escape, you're essentially like rotating to try to get your escape, right? Mm-hmm. That has to do with you moving your body and twisting to be able to get underneath their limb and get a leg. And then the kipping escape, funny enough, you end up turning into a ball. You're not twisting now, and then you end up essentially fluttering your feet to get, you know, so you essentially have like 2 planes of movement covered, right? Like you have a rotation, and you have like kind of like a knee to chest kind of contraction thing going on. And then the sitting tall and doing the 2-on-1 on them if you for some reason can't get either to budge. And that usually only happens when somebody's like drastically larger than you.
Right.
Or maybe their technique is just that good. Mm-hmm. Doing the 2-on-1, the neat thing is isolates their limbs, so they have one less to attack you with too. Mm-hmm. And they essentially have to kind of deal with it, right? And then from there, now you can assess whether rotating will get you what you want, or going, into a ball. Like it's really, like, I'm trying to like simplify this as much as possible.
Yeah.
Either going into a ball and you wiggle your feet and your legs, or you're turning to your side and scooping is what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think if a system falls apart, if suddenly you have these 3 and they work roughly well against someone your same size and roughly your same skill level, and starts falling apart, getting higher up, either you have to work on your timing. So either you have to work on timing it and priming the situation better. Either you have to work on the technique itself. Mm-hmm. Maybe your kipping is only subpar because you've only had to do it against less experienced people who weigh the same as you, or work on not letting them get him out in the first place.
Best move right there.
If I have someone who's 100 pounds on me and it's like, yeah, I'm going to try my best, but if it falls apart, I shouldn't be comfortable with someone that big and large coming on top of me and go like, here's a great technique, but almost like every technique needs like a little asterisk next to it. Like, please do not use if someone's 100 pounds heavier than you and they have intense cauliflower ears. Like, whatever the case may be.
It's like a pharmaceutical commercial.
Like, that would be the best.
Like these monoscapes come with these side effects.
You're going to watch for our YouTube channel. We're going to make like, happy people going golfing. Yeah. It's going to be talking about why you should use kipping in your life.
Kipping may be prone to,
Oh, that's hilarious.
Kind of funny.
I'll play off of that if you're all good.
Do it.
With my second revelation, and Matt's going to really agree with this one because I've shown this one in class multiple times, is the quadrants for sweeping.
Oh, yes.
That was a really big revelation to me.
Deal.
So I was a big fan of butterfly guard, things like scissor sweeps and, rolling people over from guard. The problem was in the beginning of jiu-jitsu, you focus more on the technique itself. So your coach shows you, all right, you overhook the arm, underhook this, lift with those butterflies and sweep the other person over. And it looks very smooth and great. And you do it with your partner and it comes off okay, but your partner is, being mildly helpful, maybe a little resistance to really test it. But once the resistance really settles in, it can be difficult to like lift and launch. So I'm going to steal this again. Another Gordon Ryan instructional, I think I was talking about open guard potentially, and focused on more rolling people above. How can we label this quadrant? It's like, so if I'm laying on my back, it's like above my head and either to the left or to the right. That's basically anything above the shoulder line. So if you guys are visualizing this, I'm laying on my back. It's everything above my shoulders and to the right or left of my shoulders, but everything is above. Versus a lot of people, when they sweep, they're sweeping people down along their hip line.
Yeah.
Or sweeping kind of like a pancake flip.
Yeah.
Versus what you should be doing is visualizing that you're going to force your partner to do a forwards roll. Like that's what you're doing. You're like bringing them over, pulling them underneath, and their lower body goes for the flip.
It's like, don't flip them north, east, south, or west.
Yeah,
there should northwest and northeast.
There's some dangerous ones I've seen from close guard when people stand up and you have their sleeves. You can pull in with their knees and push their hands through and just flip people. So I'm a big fan of taking people down and basically forcing them to do gymnastics. Like, I'll force you to do a forwards roll. And force sounds weird, but I'm like positioning their body that they have no choice but to do the movement.
Yeah, it's that or face plant.
Yeah. So in a way that they can't face plant.
Oh, okay.
Like you're tucking the shoulder underneath so that their head and their body has to turn in such a way. Like I would hate for someone to, face plant and hurt themselves. But a lot of sweeps of bringing people up and over suddenly made these people I rolled with who were really big and strong and heavy and had some semblance of the technique. Suddenly, all that power just came, rushing back into these techniques. But again, it's something like your coach can tell you, here's the movements and the patterns, and you can watch on YouTube or instructional. But it's like, these are like Henry Akins and Hickson Gracie talk about, like the invisible jiu-jitsu. It's like more of a concepts of the ideas of sweeps, not so much of like, okay, today we are going to, focus on elevator sweep or scissor sweep. And they're doing the movements, chop the leg, blah, 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 and they flop over. And you're like, that's fine. But all these high-level black belts intuitively know the sweeping style.
Yeah.
So outside, you're like, wow, they got swept and looked really cool. But it's those little things like, yeah, all my sweeps have the same focus of bringing people above in those quadrants. And suddenly just like, once again, like I took very basic sweeps like the scissor sweep and a little bit with the pendulum sweep as well. And it all came rushing back. It's stuff like day one, you get taught like, oh, this is a really great move. And you throw on your friends and you're like, well, coach says it's a really great move and it doesn't work for me in live resistance. But you're watching your coach slam people with this. And so it's those little details that maybe even a coach has a hard time articulating.
If they haven't thought about
That's
it.
a tough one.
Or run into that challenge.
Yeah. And it's hard for me myself too as a coach. Like sometimes there's things I do very intuitively. I think you've caught me one or two times, like when I'm teaching something, suddenly there's a limb doing something else by itself. And you're like, why are you hooking your leg back? Oh, I didn't even realize I was doing that. So sometimes, someone who's a high level practitioner, like purple belt and up, like they're doing things that are more intuitively. It's almost like having a sense of the tide of the ocean. Like you have more of this like ebb and flow and connected to people, which is why people like Luke roll with their eyes closed all the time. It's like you're kind of sensing the body weight, but just even telling beginner people when they're talking about reversals or sweeps, bring them above your shoulders, so left or right.
Yeah.
Gives you a destination to go to, like changes everything. I think Danaher actually had mentioned saying, look to where you want to sweep them to. So when you're sweeping, like look up in that direction and your body will already be positioning almost belly down towards that instead of staying facing up and turning. A lot of judo throws are very similar as well. It's like if you're doing a drop seinagi, like you're turning to where you're going and they're kind of ripping in that same direction with rotational force.
Part of it too, I think, is when you pull someone to an upper quadrant, you're getting their body weight on top of you more and you're in like this loaded position, right?
And then their lower body weight is light.
Yep. And then you can, because I was just thinking of like a thought experiment where like if you were laying on your back and there was a cinder block by your feet and you had to get the cinder block over your head while you're laying on your back, would you do it by trying to like, how would you try to lift it? And it's well, I would try to get the cinder block as close to my body as I could. Yeah. Get it under, I would try to get underneath the cinder block and then kick it over my head. Yeah, you like
scoot your hips closer to
it. You'd get underneath it and then you try to lift it. Yeah, or like you could say a bag of sand or something. Like whatever you want, but right, like a dead weight. Essentially a dead weight, how would you try to do it? And it's like, well, I would try to do that. Now, let's take the thought experiment even further. And let's say the sandbag weighs 150, 200 pounds. What would you do then? It's like, oh, I would definitely need to get underneath it. I probably would be using actually like my feet not as much and whatnot. I'd be using my shin bones and my knees and stuff to try to just create stronger frames. I wouldn't be posting out with my hands either. I'd be pulling up and just trying to get this thing over me and then rolling my spine and trying to kick it over my shoulder because I don't want it to roll over my face. Yeah. So it's kind of like a weird.
And it's funny within the guard position, it's very difficult, especially with the gi, to stop getting pulled forward and dragged forward. Like you could take a collar and sleeve and pull someone forward with the gi because most people, it's like their hands or whatever might be posting on the body, but I can literally grab a sleeve and a collar, use my legs and drag you forward and I load up all your weight and then whoa, big switch.
There's some big sweeps in the gi.
Yeah, it becomes greatly more amplified. Without the gi, it's a lot more angles. So that's why I like pendulum sweeps and flower sweeps. For more angles at that point. Sometimes you could do a no-gi scissor sweep if, the arm positioning is right and you have a collar tie. But yeah, it just, anytime I'm sweeping now, in the process of the sweep, I'm thinking I'm bringing them overhead. I'm bringing them like off to the quadrant, and it helps.
You know, actually, I have one for sweeping too.
Oh, perfect. We're
all right,
vibing off each other.
Okay, so this one was a big one for me. When sweeping, if you just sweep them, usually you have a foot or something. Don't let go of it.
Don't let go of it.
Yeah, you'll usually have a wrist or you'll have a foot. You'll have like one of their limbs in your hands to do this.
Yes.
Or you'll have it trapped in some way. And it's just like, you know, a lot of the time people just like disengage or just let go of it and then try to go somewhere else. Like, no, keep the foot.
Yeah, like it's a new position. Like, cool, it did its job.
Yeah. And then you just kind of like reset. It's like, no, if you have a foot or something, like post that thing up, use it to keep pushing yourself to the next position. So like, especially if you have an ankle, you have a massive lever to their whole body. And if they're on their back now, you like so much more control, and you're going to fight to do what? Grab their ankle after you let go of it anyways, or grab their like leg some way.
I think a lot of that too is to not view those sweeps and those movements as like separate statements, but everything merges into each other.
Yes.
Like once you sweep someone, it's like you're continuing onwards.
Yeah.
Why would you flip and let go and then have this position versus you're constantly grabbing that wrist or ankle or whatever, and you're there, just keep utilizing it.
Yeah.
There's no point, like, and kind of like you joke around in class, like, don't touch my wrist.
Yeah.
Don't touch. Like, you have it. Why are you letting go?
Yeah.
You have top position. You know, that's a really good one. Just to like not let any of those sweeps, like once you have positive connections on someone, you keep taking that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Keep moving on that.
Why give it up, you know?
Oh, I like that a lot. Let's see what's here. Submissions. So this is more of like a generalized thought process when it comes to submissions. It sounds a little, broader for a concept, but like connection and tightness. And I say this specifically, and Matt's been on the receiving end of this as well, of like triangles or chokes. It is no joke whenever your coach says like you think of yourself as like an anaconda or a snake. It's like if you ever watch National Geographic documentaries and a snake is wrapping around something, there is not a single square inch of space that is being like loose. It is like its body is meant to like wrap around. And I remember this being visualized early on when people talked about rear naked chokes. So it's typically someone who's bigger and stronger and has a lot of muscles. It's just like, brings their arm around your neck 99 of 100 times. For a newer person, it's going to be like tight and rigid. They're just like they're throwing their arm around your neck and they're all tight and they're squeezing, but inside of it is all these little pockets of space. And so then they're all surprised that someone's able to survive and wriggle out, or someone watching going, oh my gosh, you were caught in this arm triangle or triangle choke. Like, how did you survive that? And I feel that lately with arm triangles with myself, or even when I did cross collars in the past or triangle chokes, I am so focused on my muscles vacuum sealing around someone's neck. Like even the other day when we were playing the Craig Jones arm triangle and you're doing that arm pumping motion is to get everything so sealed that's almost like it's going through their neck. And now that you apply pressure, it's like all that pressure is going directly into that neck or right to the carotids. So I think so many people focus on once again, you're doing a sweep or whatever, and it's more like the generalized look. Once you get good at getting into something and somewhat controlling it, ask yourself, how mechanically tight is your movement? Can it feel like you're kind of like biting into the neck? Because sometimes it needs a little kip motion to kind of like cinch it up a little bit. But once it's there, it's like, oh man, it feels like my head's going to pop off of how tight everything is.
You know, a way to maybe like summarize this thought too would be focusing on like essentially where your muscles and your skin is more than your bones.
Yeah.
Right? Because like we think about like a lot of jiu-jitsu movements and where do I put my foot and my hand? Like it's like in space, where do these things go?
Yeah.
But in these little ones, it's like your bones are going to move very little. But like in the arm triangle example, like that is the difference it seems between a really good arm triangle and one that just hurts the back of your neck, is like it's like how you connect on the bend of the arm and how much your muscle is around their neck.
Yeah, we talk about it like a bite.
Yeah, I think, and if you put your hand in between your bicep, or on your bicep, and then
I'm doing this too right now.
Yeah, like you can feel it, and then if you do it relax and then squeeze, It's like,
yeah, bite
radically
it with flex muscles.
Yeah, it doesn't do the same.
Yeah, but it's like you just seal it around. You're like,
And
oh my
then-
gosh.
Yeah, you do it loose, and then when you tighten your forearm and your bicep, it's like done deal.
So especially in the beginning, obviously you get good at the mechanics, but like I said, it's like over time, it's like if you're choking someone, like make it tight, make it not, see, tight's a weird word too, like vacuum sealed, not a square inch. Like you might have to kind of pump the arm a little bit to get in there. But once you do, your partner's going to be like, how does it feel like my head's exploding off right now? It's like, that's similar to what it did for me with triangles too. It was like cutting angles and making the connection.
Yeah.
Triangles are still bad, but like once you get that seal on, people will be surprised at how insanely tight they are with your triangles.
Yeah. The whole sideways thing there.
Yeah.
Big difference.
Yeah. And that was kind of one of those concepts I was going to talk about too. Like if we're talking details, like cutting angles and triangles was a really big thing. We'll kind of branch off it a little bit, but it sounds like it's a shared one for both of us. That just cutting angles so that you're not smashed or postured helped a ton with getting more effective triangle chokes at that point.
Yeah.
It was really, really big for us to cut the corner, getting those shins in alignment.
Yeah.
Instead of like, the typical 90-degree cut with triangles. It's just getting those shins in alignment. Ryan Hall does a really good job explaining that. Obviously, we're referencing some Gordon Ryan and Danaher material as well. This is all stuff, honestly, I think they share a lot on their YouTube channels. So even though their instructionals are fantastic and very deep, some of these concepts too, because they're so important, they share it freely. So don't feel hesitant to go look that up, because you'll be surprised how many gems you can find online. Did you have one off the top of your head?
Oh yeah, I got another one here. And actually, funny enough, as we're talking about some of like the greats when it comes to instructional material and whatnot, one who really like changed the whole way I looked at jiu-jitsu and was the thing that I wish I would have found like a year sooner was Rob Bernanke's essentially like BJJ concepts.
Yeah.
He made an instructional with Stephen Kesting, which started it. I believe that's where it came from, where he showed his whole system on how like alignment works. And it has posture, structure, and base. And just like the whole idea of adding like a vernacular to this was really cool. I thought that was super neat. And it goes even deeper than what I'm saying here. Like the way he communicates about different types of techniques and whatnot, I think is really helpful. And just the concepts that underlay those techniques, like the whole taking out the slack out of a joint, like that's something I got from Rob Bernanke. And that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Like for those who are listening who don't know that one, like if you're doing an arm bar, or actually easiest way to remember or to like visualize it is a Kimura from north south. If you're doing a Kimura, you pull up on it hard before you end up twisting it. Like, and you can pull up pretty hard on that and you won't hurt somebody because it's still in line. But the thing is, you're taking every little bit of like oomph out of the joint that you can before you twist it. So it's already super taut and you'll get taps a lot sooner. And so, so that, anyways, I actually deviated. So the posture, structure, and base though, huge deal. So posture is the positioning of essentially your neck, your trunk, and your spine. You want it in a strong position, which would be in a line with itself, right? And if you're on your back, it would essentially just be like straighter, right? Structure is efficient use of your limbs. So that's where you're actually using your limbs to create frames, not to push, because frames don't push. But yeah, just making sure your limbs are in the right spot, using the right ranges and things like that. That was a huge one for me. And then base, which was your ability to generate and absorb force.
Ooh.
See, so those all together, if you have all three of those, he's actually got a thing where they talk about the score, right? Like when you're rolling, you should be able to figure out what the score is. Do you have posture? Do you have a structure, and do you have base? Well, then you have a score of 3, and whatever you're going to do is probably got a high likelihood of being pulled off. If like you have base, but they have really good posture and structure, you can't really get to them because they have really good frames and whatnot. If you, on the other hand though, if you end up breaking their posture by like getting their spine twisted, like let's use, when you go in a side control and you shelf their legs the other way, but you're pinning the top of their torso, you're twisting their spine. They're not gonna be able to generate a lot of force. They have no base. They have the broken posture. And now this one's a good example too, because their structure's so goofed up because they're spun. They've essentially got like one bad post they can use, and you're in a really dominant position where whatever you want to do next, you'll more likely succeed. Versus when someone's facing you and has both knees on you, has their frames on you, and you both are in a place where you both can generate force, like nothing's going to happen there.
Yeah. I like that score concept.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of more the generalized grappling skills that I think so many people focused on grappling where it's like, oh, I'm doing this technique. You're like watching old kung fu movie. It's like exchanging like, tiger claw meets this. And it's like, sometimes it's like that, but most of the time it's like you said, it's like a score. It's like, how's their base? How's their posture? Like, I like how you talk about the tension and tightness. Like, that's kind of how I reference like the whole Mortal Kombat finisher. It should feel like you're pulling the arm out of socket.
Yeah.
Before you actually rotating a submission or applying a submission at that point.
What's neat about this one is it actually ties into your sweep that you're talking about with sweeps.
Oh, that's true.
Because you think about why is the sweep effective?
Yeah.
You have good posture, base, and structure when you're doing that because you're pulling them under, you're not extending yourself, and then you're able to keep your limbs close. You have good frames and you have good leverages to be able to pull them or rip, whatever we need to do.
Yeah.
They, on the other hand, have no base or very little base because they can't generate force against the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Their posture might be okay, unless if we're in a gi, say you have a collar sleeve and you're pulling it across their body,
sure,
you're twisting their body. So then you're breaking their posture. And then like their structure, like they really, like if you have one of their wrists, like if you think about most sweeps work when you just have their wrist or their leg on one side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or both, better yet, both. They can't post, which is essentially their structure, which is efficient use of their limbs. So they get swept.
Yeah, I think this would be a great training drill for most jiu-jitsu athletes to almost have a couple rounds and forget about using techniques and just focusing on some of these concepts. Like, where's their base? Where's your frames? And most techniques that are manifested in jiu-jitsu are just either how to reduce the score for the other person or how to advance the score for yourself.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the hard part where like the coach or whomever will demonstrate technique and they're actually demonstrating how to overcome these tasks. But everyone in the beginning focuses on, I just got to do the technique.
Yeah.
And I think once people understand the underlying foundations, you're able to problem shoot or troubleshoot during the situation versus going like, coach, I'm doing the move. Why isn't it working? And I think that's where everyone, purple belt and above at least, should be able to troubleshoot those things to say like, why do they have a base there? Or like, if I'm having trouble sweeping, I'm going, okay, well, do they have posts out? How can I remove a post? How can I make that way up to the upper quadrant?
Why purple? Why not blue?
I think it's tough because I think in the beginning, especially blue belt can still manage it. I think it's, now we start coming back into those conversations of like where efficient use of time is in the beginning of jiu-jitsu. Like, would you be, we kind of talk about like some of the drilling that we do. Like, should we focus on more task-oriented goals or should we focus on like building a language of techniques?
I'd say both.
Yeah, I would say both.
Yeah.
And I think that's why in the beginning to say like, if you get really good at the task, like imagine if we just told brand new people to say, your goal is to remove a post and remove a base. And for them to kind of intuitively figure out, for us to show it and say, here's a manifested version of how to do that. And it's called a scissor sweep. We take this and do it. Use it more like a tool in the midst of your troubleshooting position, but it's not saying this is the way.
Yeah.
You're saying this is an effective way of how we can do it, but your partner is moving and adjusting in space and they're resisting to you. So it's never going to look clean. I think Andrew Wiltsey had a really good quote that he was like, you do a knee slice on someone, it's not going to look like a knee slice. Like in a live resistance, like you're kind of giving the path and the primed way, but your partner's trying to do stuff too.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to do like the technique, it's going to look sloppy and weird, or you might have a, be down on yourself because the technique didn't work. But did you get past your knees? Did you get to the hip line? It's like that movement pattern gets you that goal. But essentially, like you're talking about, like you're getting past frames, you're building good, strong structure. Like you're doing all those things, but it gets, manifested as a movement pattern, which we call the knee slice.
What's interesting is, as we're thinking about how most techniques actually don't look nearly as pretty as you do when you're practicing.
What looks the prettiest, Matt?
The prettiest?
What looks like the prettiest one?
I would say some judo throws.
Yeah, I think
some
so
judo
too.
throws. Like, because if you think about it, why is it so cool when someone does a really big, awesome judo throw?
Yeah.
Because it's hard to make it look pretty. Usually it's like people stumbling over each other, choppy steps, they kick something out, they're balancing again. That's why it's so cool to see just a massive throw.
It reminds me a little bit like when boxing, where they'll like set someone up and it's like as they move, like this uppercut just gets hit perfectly.
Yeah.
Because you're like priming it. And I've seen that with judo throws where it's like 1, 2, whoop. It's like just moves them around and they're almost at the whim of this person, but they're like building up this momentum and boom, it's just a big throw. And that's what gets the whole audience just like,
and it's rare.
hushed. And it's rare,
right?
Because I think it's two people trying to connect.
Yeah.
So I think some sub movements are good. I'm a big fan of the scissor sweep and the gi. If done right, you can load people up a little bit.
Yeah.
Like here. Yeah, man, it's like, it's such a quick thought and a quick movement of a transition. Like you said, if you ride the wrist up, suddenly you're just in mount. And it's like, how'd that happen? It's like, it looks really cool. So some of those big sudden movements, but like we are just discussing, like the prettiness of a move. And I think some people kind of get in awe when they watch like a YouTube video or Instagram video where things are very short and quick and they have time to make it very pretty.
And it's a highlight reel if they're showing
it's live, a highlight, you know, it's like it's showing something, you know, that looks really cool and efficient, but it's more for like the spectators and not for yourself. So you're trying to like magnify the technique that's in there so that outside, you know, viewers can see. But most that we feel, like you said, it's like the connection. I've always loved the description of Roger Gracie said his top pressure felt like the only thing I can move was my eyes. But Roger Gracie laying on me and Matt laying on me or our friend Luke may not look any different to an outside spectator.
Yeah.
But from underneath,
the Roger Gracie one's going to be legit, you know?
Yeah, Matt's got some good top pressure too. But it's something where it's like, it's more of a visual thing, but not being too harsh on yourself if you're doing a movement and it just doesn't look the prettiest. Like sometimes you got to prime it a little bit better. Some moves, it's just live grappling. Your coach shows things with, you know, light resistance so you get used to the movement pattern. But honestly, it's putting yourself in the fire and you'll find which parts of the move actually are the most important to go through.
You know, I wonder if the expectations of something being smooth or pretty and whatnot and looking nice is actually from the fact that like a lot of people who do martial arts when they're younger, they watch kung fu flicks. Yeah. Where the movement is like very, very flowery. And it's a movie. It's, you know, it's essentially, you know, Eastern superhero movies is really what they are. Right. So, we get this expectation of that because there's so many cool shots where smoothness is rewarded. Versus wrestling is choppy and, you know, and like nothing usually looks super pretty with it, right? Right. Compared to how you know, I think that's why when people see a video where someone did do something really clean in a high level, everybody's going like, whoa, just because that means it was so technically just perfect. It was just, it was a moment in time where you caught a wave where you normally wouldn't be able to, and it just worked out really, really well.
I think it's interesting because when we see certain movement patterns, there's things where you look at and go, well, my body could do that. I can move my body in such a way that like when your coach does a movement, suddenly it's like, I know the same move. So how do they make it seem so smooth? Or a good example is like dancing. If you see like a ballroom dancer, it's like, well, they seem like they're doing the same thing they just taught during class, but at a very efficient level. Yeah. And I'm sitting here going, I'm trying to do the same movement, but why do my feet feel flat to the floor? Why do I feel stubborn and awkward when you're technically doing the same thing?
Yeah. Why does their waltz look so smooth?
But I hear things like you have to like keep weight on your toes. You have to like do all these things where it's like maybe intuitive things that they built up. Maybe it's literally like dance floor time, like built up, but something from the outside going, I'm doing that same thing. How can I, you know, how can I make it that smooth? And sometimes it's a unfortunate answer of like, you just have to do it more times. Yeah. But sometimes we can throw bits of gold here and there to say things like I said, like to be more on your toes for dancing or throwing people towards quadrants. Yep, so it's like, I think there's some physical cues and mental things that can help people, but it's like, you can't be efficient from grappling solely by just reading a book.
Yeah, no, it's like swimming.
Yeah. Like you can't sit 5 years in your living room and read everything in the perfect technique and then come and go, I know all these things. It's like almost should be a good thought experiment to have someone who has that and see it, just how technically good they are versus someone, if you could isolate it and have someone who's just grappling for 2 years.
Yeah, no YouTube or
no YouTube.
Like that.
You just had to give them some general goals and guidelines with no submissions, nothing. And then to have someone who's got everything, like someone who's got all the instructionals and can't do it, but watches it in 2 years' time, you both have to grapple.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
Yeah.
That'd be cool. That'd be a neat thing to figure out. Like one to be more academic in nature and the other one is more like practical.
I think honestly, because of the trial and error from the grappler who maybe has no experience, they can intuitively feel what you talked about, base and posture and things like that, of like just trial and error of like what feels better. And even though the book smarts can tell you like these things are important, I think like certain movements and stuff, like we talked about the scissor sweep, like they know the mechanics, but a lot of things aren't like weighted so importantly. Like it's 80% of this move is pulling people above your head.
Yeah.
You know, like, and you have to like have all these things done in a very quick manner when it comes to grappling. This isn't like a chess match would be different.
Yeah.
Like if you had 2 years to study chess openings and things like that, like cool, you'd kill the person who had 2 years of just playing a random match and trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
You destroy them. But grappling, I don't think that would be the same. So,
you know, the thing that this makes me, the idea this makes me kind of play with is different cues work for different people for different things when it comes to physical movements, right? Because you can't feel what they're feeling.
Mhm.
So it's almost like we need to break apart moves by all the different possible cues where it's like, let me tell you in a joint by joint approach what everything's doing.
Mhm.
And then I wonder if that would work really well from like a teaching perspective for understanding a movement, because you could have a room full of people and they all get shown the same thing and they'll all pick up on different things. You know,
Right.
like even when you and I were at the Craig Jones seminar last
Mhm.
weekend, you know, there were some things you pointed out that was like, oh, I didn't even notice that, right?
Yeah.
And the same happened in the reverse, right?
Yep.
Where it was just like, I think his arm was here, you know, like you just kind of pick up on different things. And then there's kind of blanks, you know, blank spaces in your understanding
Right.
in other different chunks. And if you have a bunch of people, I bet you the blank spaces of understanding would actually be varied throughout
Yeah.
the entire room.
Was that thought experiment where it's like if there's 6 people who are blind and they're feeling an elephant?
Oh, yeah.
The
That
other
one,
one's like, oh, what is this thing? Oh, it's like a big, large snake. Oh, no,
Yeah.
it's a tree trunk. It's like
Mhm.
you're all feeling the same thing. So I had one that was interesting, and it's not so much of a technical focus or like a technique or movement,
Yeah.
but this is something you and I have really played with strongly, is kind of like a hot keyword in the jiu-jitsu community these days, but it rings true of dilemmas.
Oh, yeah. Dilemmas are legit.
Like you have to, a game of jiu-jitsu, if I harken back, couple of years ago with Ryan Hall, he always said that every situation is like a money or your life situation. So it's like if you're sweeping someone, it's saying, hey, either you have to post out with your hand right now, which potentially gives me a submission, or you get swept to mount.
Yeah.
And to go, the submission obviously is the worst part. So it's like either I'm going to kill you or you're going to give me my money.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're like, every single time people choose the money, it's like, I don't want to be killed.
Yeah.
So in most situations, I think that's the big leap that happens in people's games, is once they say each movement that you're doing is forcing your partner to react in a certain way, that it's giving them the better way out of this moment.
Yeah. It's like, do you want to be slapped in the face or punched in the face? Yeah,
I guess I'm getting slapped.
Yeah, I guess I'm getting slapped again. Nope, getting slapped again. You know, like,
Well, and that
over.
becomes that offensive cycle we talk about, to say like, do you want to be the one being robbed all the time, or do you want to be the one robbing?
Yeah.
There was some crazy TED talk that was talking about like, I shouldn't say victimhood, but it was like almost like a mentality of people when they're, faced with difficulties in life. And someone says, there's a gun to the head. What do you do? And they said, well, I'll give them my money or whatever. And they go, why did you place yourself as a victim? Kind of thing. It was like a weird like switch thing. I'm butchering it for sure, but it was like this thought process of like, where do people default to think they're at?
Interesting.
So I think it's kind of like when people are, especially belts sometimes,
Yeah.
can make
If
people.
someone said there's a gun in your head, what do? You could say lower the gun.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, that's another like wacky one,
But
right?
they assume
Where,
like you're the one being robbed. Obviously, like, robbing someone is not seen as a morally right thing. So they
Yeah.
probably think like, I wouldn't be doing it. But it was a cool thought process to say, if someone gave some default sentence and you lean towards like you being on the receiving end of something
Mhm.
poor, it's like, well, why weren't you in the frame set of the top person?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh.
here's a good example.
I got to see this TED talk, because that sounds actually
Yeah.
interesting. Because I was thinking, like when I said lower the gun,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother idea, you know?
We got a better one. If I say, Matt, you're in mount, what do you do?
I try to get your arms essentially separated from the
Yeah,
line.
but you don't think like, you're underneath mount.
Oh yeah, no, I was the aggressor.
Right.
All right, you're right.
Like to say you're in mount.
Yeah.
Or you're in back control. Because sometimes when we talk about close guard, sometimes we have to say things. You're on the top of close guard or bottom of close guard. Like you're in close guard.
Yeah.
And they go, do you mean like they're in my close guard, or I'm in? It's confusing.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I like that.
But if you have that, it can already label people to say, are you the aggressor or are you the receiver? And I think honestly, sometimes people will lean a certain way based on like their belt rank. So I will give two good examples of this. One is yourself and one is Jordan, because like Jordan, both of you are lifelong, combat enthusiasts probably, or like, I think because
that's a good way to say it.
Very wrestling. I wouldn't say martial arts. Wrestling
I'd say wrestling's a martial art.
Yeah,
I would.
So like more of like a martial arts.
Combat enthusiast is a good word though. I like that because it's very like encompassing.
Yeah, like you're trying to manipulate and destroy a human being. But to say both of you have like, let's say like you just received your blue belt not that long ago, and Jordan was promoted to a blue belt maybe a year ago or something like that, with not that much experience, like very little practical jiu-jitsu experience.
But rocks at wrestling.
But you rocks at wrestling. But for yourself being very technically minded, I think the way that you manifest your skill sets on the mat don't align so well with like what you would see as a typical blue belt grappler. Like I see you more like the concepts, and like we talked about before, like I really feel strong with things like purple belts and belts itself to show more of like the full understanding of the grappling art itself for manifestation. But to see like you understand very well like the kipping escape or the dilemma work and things like that, how much it actually amplifies your ability to perform. And I think sometimes we're told in the beginning, like when you're a white belt or maybe an early blue belt, don't think about offense. You're just going to get smashed every single day. So instead of thinking offense, just think, how can I survive?
Which is funny because like depending on who that advice is being given to, right? Like if someone does have a martial background, like that the advice needs to change, right? Because it's like people don't really smash Jordan. Jordan does, he's the smasher, right? So like he's really good at getting to a top position and whatnot. And so the advice that he would get would be, I think, a little bit different than someone who's never done a combat activity.
Yeah.
Then they're going to be like, I think the learn to survive would be a good one because it's almost like you've gone through that process with whatever your first martial art is. Whether it's a striking art with like myself, whether it's a wrestling art like Jordan, you yourself, right? Like when you first start sparring in a striking art, like you get your butt kicked a bunch again and again and again, and eventually you get better,
Here's a cool example that just came to mind. Like, let's take, for example, one of the most classic martial arts movies of all time, which is The Karate Kid. Cobra Kai is very much like, get after it and destroy. And
actually would have won.
Daniel-san is like more of like a very subtle wax on, wax off, more like defensive and counter-striking and things like that. But the idea is that like, just because you are aggressing or moving forward does not mean that, it's like a bad thing. Like just because you're being offensive, doesn't like, if someone's bigger and stronger than you, you don't have to sit and like yield to being like, I'm the white belt. I am the smaller person. Like I should be focusing on just survival. It's like, yeah, I get it. If it's like a self-defense or something where maybe you're tiring the person out, which I think is a load of crap, to be honest. I think a lot of times that people do things to say like, that's the Simpsons example we gave yesterday, where it's like, I will beat you when you're tired of beating me up, and then let's see who's good.
Yeah.
It's like,
you have 15 minutes.
Yeah, like, come at me, man. Like, you're so tired. Like, this is going to be easy now.
I have a hot take.
What's that?
I don't like the Karate Kid.
Come on.
I think it's crud.
It's crud?
Yeah, it's crud.
The crud kid?
It's the crud kid. All he does is chores. He just does a bunch of chores and then learns how to fight better. It was just like we talked about with our thought experiment.
Yeah.
The book versus the actual feeling of another human being. And guess what? Even the bad guy who has more combat experience is going to kick your butt. That's how it works. Combat does not care about your moral integrity.
We have the best idea for another episode. We'll talk about martial applications from movies and how they apply to training. It's like the Karate Kid shows this feeling like, oh, I'll do some sort of mystical training. Okay, but let's counter that example with Kung Fu Panda. He trains the panda to get dumplings, and in that sense, he learns Kung Fu skills. So
it's a very great Greg Saunders way to do it. You think about it.
He will find a way to catch that. Like,
look at that. He actually never did get caught a technique.
Yeah, he had chased the dragon scroll the whole time, and he was fighting and used his belly. It's like, there's a way. But yes, I feel like actual practical applications is just...
I think Tai Long's the coolest guy in that movie.
Tai Long?
The bad guy, yeah.
Oh, he's so good.
He's so cool.
That cat, just like...
And the guy, I forgot the name of the guy who does his voice, but like,
yeah,
the perfect guy.
No, like
he's the dad in Hot Rod.
Yeah,
like, he's so funny.
Yeah,
he's so funny.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, that one actually held up a lot. My son was watching it not long ago. Kung Fu Panda.
It's
held up. It was a really
I'm always surprised at how well some of those movies have like,
it has
very
all the
solid
tropes
storyline
and stuff, but yet it had a fun story and it was silly. Plus, I think
graphics are amazing.
Yeah, and Jack Black's funny. I like Jack Black. All right, here. I know we're coming up on our time soon. I actually had 2 more to throw out.
Do it.
You guys ready? Or say you ready? Here we go. First, we've actually already talked about a little bit, but don't let people control your head, wrists, and don't touch me. Don't touch me. But it's true though, right? Like if you're trying to pass guard, like if they get your ankles, good luck, right? If they get your wrists, good luck.
Yeah.
Like funny enough, I remember one of the early times when I was rolling in the gi with Justice.
Okay.
And he was being a great rolling partner. I was super new. He had a double wrist grab on me. I tried to do like a Toriando to him, and he just sat there because he had my wrist. Yeah. And he was just letting me feel it out. Like he was being like the consummate training partner, right? Like where he just was like letting me feel it out. Where I was just like, oh crud, my hands are over there. Like I can't go over. You know, it was like the first like month or 2 of my training.
Sure.
And it was just it was really interesting. So that's an example there. And then if you're trying to pass recumbent or like a person laying on their back, right? Or who's supine. If they get your ankles, man, like that's not good. If they get one ankle and then they get legs on that leg and then they get their other ankle, you're getting swept.
Does it seem like something where you could apply the same score system to that?
Probably. Like, I think it just in general, don't let people touch your ankles or your wrists. Yeah, ankles, and then your head. Wrists. The head though is more when you're wrestling or when you're playing a bottom position.
So I was gonna give actually a counterpoint because I was actually gonna focus on the head to say if someone grabs your head, do you focus on stripping that or do you focus on counter grabbing their head?
I think it would depend on the situation. If they grab my head and crank me down, like we've talked about with, preventing people kipping and whatnot.
Yeah,
that you got to strip the hand. You got to get it off your head. Yeah. Like, also, if you're playing like a bottom half guard and they start crunching you down and doing like some type of cradle thing, you got to get the hand off. It's almost like the hierarchy goes like they'll go for the further out thing typically first, unless you're wrestling because they're snap downs.
Yeah.
And your head might be the further thing out, kind of. I know hands are going to be in front, but you know what I mean? And it's really important. And if they get to a wrist or an ankle, they're going to eventually probably get to a good position on your torso, and then eventually they'll crunch the neck down. If your neck's getting crunched, you got no power. Like,
it's a good example to say that you should be very mindful what your opponent is doing.
Yeah.
Versus just saying, I can go for a Toriando pass right now. And it's like, like you're doing the movement, but you're not having the grips, and you could be falling into something really bad right there.
And like people talk about grip fighting. Yeah, it's one of the most important things you can do, but nobody really talks about there probably is people who do. I just haven't stumbled across it very well. But put it simply, like, what is grip fighting? And it's like, I grabbed you and you can't grab me in the moment that I'm trying to do the thing I want to do. Because you like very rarely do you have a grip that's just like there, right? It's going nowhere. You're going to lose the grip in a bit, but like,
I think this is where the gi gets weird because some people will get positive grips and they won't do anything with it. They'll just hold.
Yeah, and you can't.
Like my middle finger is very subtly still messed up, mostly from gis because of the middle finger being more the predominant holder.
Ah, gotcha.
Versus people like Danaher says, grip and go.
Yeah, grip and go.
Grip and go with it. It's like, so.
Yeah, gripping is not a position.
No. A temporary positive spot to move on to something else.
It's like the 2-on-1 we've been doing from standing.
Like if you have that connection and you aren't doing anything with it, in your brain you should be going, why did I want this connection in the first place?
Yeah, they're going to strip it and then they're going to have their grip.
You got this 2-on-1, like, what do you do from right here? It's like, you should be immediately grabbing it and knowing, okay, this is what I should be doing right now.
I think it takes a little while for people to like open up where they realize like what grip they want. Like even for like, if you're standing, just recently I've started doing more Russian Thai stuff. Yeah. Now I know exactly the grip I'm going for. And the second I get it, I can start to impose my game from a standing position. That's the thing. Like I'm going to that grip to get to this position, and then I go into that system. But I think a lot of times people will just approach each other and just start grabbing stuff. And it's not necessarily a bad idea to start grabbing ankles and feet and wrists and stuff, because you'll figure stuff out. But anyways, that was a big one. And then the head one is also like just a defensive one. You're rarely going to grab their head with your head, Yeah. The only time I can think about you would do something like that's from the back control, where you're pushing their spine out of alignment, like we did yesterday.
I felt that next day.
Yeah, I was going to say, like that one can grind, but no, anyways, that was a huge realization for me. If that one alone, it'd be interesting to throw that at somebody and just be like, don't touch your wrists. Yeah. And just see what happens when they're like rolling against like a fellow person of the same skill level.
That sounds a lot like Rob Bernanke's FYBJJ.
Yeah.
Drills where it's like, don't let them do it. Just screw your jiu-jitsu. Like, just like, you're not gonna touch, you're not gonna do anything to me. But that we got time with it because it was just with the studio.
Okay.
So I want to give one more on my end. And again, this is a concept one, but this was the biggest changer for me in my entire game. Biggest
I got one more after you.
Okay, we got time. I believe so. Focus on one thing you want.
Yeah, I don't know why that was on my list.
That was on your list?
It's not, but it should be. That's like the really
focus on one thing. And I've rolled many people. I've had groups of people that I used to train and roll with all the time. It was very consistent. One of the things I'm sure yourself as listeners who are grapplers will recognize is that you roll with someone for a while, you know their style, they know your style, and pretty soon things get nullified. You have a relaxed Tuesday night, you're just sitting here grappling, work with your partner. But every once in a while, something will come up and say like I haven't tapped them in a while. Like they know my sweeps, they know my submissions. It's like, even though I think I get deep in something, like they wriggle their way out, or even just getting close to something. So when I was crossing over as my purple belt, I had a really difficult time tapping my fellow crew with submissions. I would get close, but like they knew what was kind of coming and things like that. And the biggest change for me was after a private lesson with a black belt was to focus on getting and finishing with one thing. I had to suddenly remove in my mind that anything else was on the table. This wasn't something I fully addressed with my partners. I wasn't telling them like, hey, I'm getting a rear naked choke this round.
Which actually I think works better now that we've taken the board isn't up.
Oh, right. Like no one kind of knows your goals.
It's a little helpful.
But to say like, they don't know what I'm going for, but every night could change. You can't just say like every single time they know I'm going for a rear naked choke. But if you're like mentally to yourself going, I'm going for rear naked chokes tonight, you'll actually find yourself moving and creating more opportunities than you thought you could, because now everything is screaming on you, on your radar to say, how does this lead me to a rear naked choke? Yeah. Even if you're standing, suddenly you're like, I want to drag to the back because there's a rear naked choke. Oh, I couldn't get the neck. I got the bilock. I'm going to trip them. I'm going to take their back so I can rear naked choke them. Like everything is so glued onto that, that you'll be surprised at least how far you get with your movement. Sometimes you can say things like, I'm going to choke that person tonight, or I'm going to put an arm lock on them. It does okay, but I think literally just giving yourself one specific submission will help not only so much in your training, which will give you more confidence in your grappling style, but even with competitions too, to say, this is the only one I'm going for. And you would only take something for some crazy reason it was screaming at you in your face. But otherwise, it's like, how is all this going to get a rear naked choke? So if I was in mount, I'd be sitting here going, how will I peel them up to get them to turn to get a rear naked choke?
Yeah.
But if I'm sitting here going, all right, I'm in mount. Well, cool. There's some cool opportunities here, like maybe an arm triangle, maybe a straight arm lock. Let's see what he gives me. You won't get anything. Like people will be so resistant and so tight versus saying, how can I create dilemmas? How can I create openings that will give me this specific move?
Yeah. If you don't create your goal, essentially they'll create it for you.
Right. So then otherwise you start becoming responding on their end. But if both people don't have it, you're kind of just generalized rolling, those things will happen. So you almost have to shift gears and go, nope, I'm getting this very specifically. And if you find yourself having difficulty catching it, either ask yourself, am I rolling with people who are too experienced that they're catching on to what's going on? Or do you have to back off your goals and say, maybe getting a rear naked choke is kind of like the ultimate checkmate position? Maybe saying things like, ooh, I'm going to go for a straight foot lock tonight. Or maybe I'm going to, even something silly as saying like in the beginning, go, I'm going to get to side control tonight.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, when I was doing guard passing for like three months, you know, like I think the thing is to focus even longer than just like one stint, because you're going to suck at it at first.
Right.
And if you keep at it, like your skills do improve. Like,
yeah,
you know, like at that point, like obviously you do, it's like 3 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yep.
You know, like my guard passing has regressed a little bit.
Yep.
But other things have developed in the meantime, you know, it's kind of like you're just trying to do that.
It's helped a lot because it gave me a good measurement of skill level with my training partners to say like how well, like if I'm getting on this. And then I got cocky enough where I would tell training partners, I'm going to get you in a rear naked choke. And then it's like, I told you I was going to get you in a rear naked choke and you still couldn't stop it.
It's funny that they thought you were bluffing maybe.
Yeah, maybe bluffing, rear naked choke. No, I got you in heel hook.
Yeah.
But that's the old Hicks and Gracie test, because we have a member here, Billy, that would say like, how do you get better than other people? Or even like a good measurement of how you're better than somebody else. Because sometimes belt ranks and all that kind of stuff can be weird. Because even though you could say, well, I'm a blue belt and you're a white belt and whatever the case may be, like, you know, but I feel like I'm pretty dominant or whatever. The Hicks and Gracie test was to say, you start with someone on your back. Maybe you can amplify with someone getting you like a rear naked choke or a lockup. And your goal is to not only escape the back and survive the choke, but to get yourself in a dominant position, take their back, and then put them in a rear naked choke.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate test. And it may not be, I mean, back mount is a big, 180 to the other spot. You could say, I'm going to start in a triangle choke. Not only am I going to survive it, but I'm going to pass the guard and get them in a triangle choke and finish it. So it's almost like to say, not only was this person's offense not good enough for your defense, now their defense wasn't good enough for your offense. Like you did both things. So you measured their triangle offense and their triangle defense.
Yeah.
So if your triangle defense and offense is better than theirs, there's probably a good chance that you can measure those things. Well, I mean, you could probably do that positional sparring too.
Yeah.
You could say, let's start in the triangle.
Yeah.
You finish me, I finish you. If you can do that, like the EBI overtime rules, probably the same thing with the Hicks and stuff. If you can do that sufficiently well compared to your partner, that's probably a good measurement if you're better than them in that case.
Yeah, I'll say something on the topic of Billy. He has improved so much. It's awesome. He's only doing it for a short amount of time, and he's been doing awesome.
Only a couple mornings here and there. He's come to Friday sessions too, and it's been really amazing to see. He's
awesome training partner.
Yeah, and he dove into one
Billy,
of our
if you're listening, we like you here.
Yeah, we like you here. we may have to find ways to stop your inverted ghost darces or whatever, but
yeah,
I appreciate that.
The inverted ghost darce.
I feel like it has
That's got the Dutchman. We call
the Dutchman,
the Flying Dutchman.
He almost hit that so many times. That invitational is unreal. So did you have another?
Yep, I got one.
Okay, well,
and it's actually perfectly in line with what we were just talking about.
Excellent.
It was the whole idea of just don't be a counterpuncher.
Don't be a counterpuncher.
I think it's easy to get lulled, especially when I was in the gi a little bit more, where you can, because like there's like more tricks. There's more tricks in the gi. There just is, and you could get kind of like, all right, hey, you can take 4 steps forward and I'll still catch up kind of thing. But the way I've been thinking about it more in no gi, and I think this is just a way to a good way to think about it once you've are establishing your game. When you start a match, there's a boulder at the top of a mountain and the mountain's pitched on both sides. Your opponent's on the other end, you're on one side. When you get too cocky about it, you're essentially letting them roll the boulder down your side and you're trying to stop it and then push it all the way back up and push it down their side.
Yeah.
Which that's a lot of energy and time. In reality, you should be pushing the boulder from right in the beginning where it's in neutral position onto their side and letting it roll down. And Jiu-Jitsu, I think, works a lot in that way where there's, like in boxing and stuff, you can counterpunch because you can move out of the way of things. But in grappling, there isn't whiffing as much. Yeah. Someone might whiff a flying submission, but for the most part, things are just they're still connected to you. So you're just going to be burning up energy.
It's hard to counterpunch from things like mount or back mount Like what's counterpunching? Like you attack me this way and then I'll escape.
I think it's just like kind of like giving up positions before you should too.
So here's a good example.
They're opposing their game and then you start yours.
Yeah. Like I could get things like last night I was playing with Luke a little bit of him going for an arm lock on me, but like I knew the space he was going into. Maybe I knew it wasn't as technically tight as it could have been. And if you roll newer people or less experienced people than yourself, you can counterpunch.
Yeah,
because it's kind of just like bait them and then you jump into it. It does not work against someone who's more experienced than you.
No. You just get submitted.
No, you gave your arm lock and he snapped it.
Yeah.
Like that's the hugest. I love that you left that for the last, because like I think so many people in the beginning want to play this relaxed jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
We're like, cool, I'll keep my hands here and let you float around. And then like, I'm not scared and I'm not afraid. It's like, fill you roll with a monster that will bulldoze right through you. And I think the biggest difference is telling people that we can prime situations like offensively, like a sweep is a good example we just talked about, like the money or your life.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is more of an example to say not counterpunch, but setups.
Yeah.
Like you're not waiting for them to punch and then
you're still doing your game. Like you're still doing your thing.
But you are creating movement on your end. Like it's not like I'm gonna keep my hand here and then like the hard part is that like I've seen so many people kind of do that style where it's more soft and floating. And the problem is that on the top end, I can just use that to my advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know you're tracking me or whatever. So then I'm like, cool, I'll go here. Thanks for giving me your arm.
Yeah.
It's like there's not a feeling of like, no, I should be running from you the whole time. So it's like sometimes there's a lull and sometimes there's baits and tricks.
Yeah.
But it's like
that's still not counterpunching. You're doing it with intention.
Think about my example that I taught before of like someone going into mount from side control and I'll elbow escape as they get to mount.
Mm-hmm.
Funny enough, the one person that intuitively beat it was the person sitting right in front of me.
Didn't even know I beat it until
you didn't know you beat it.
I was just
because
doing normal stuff.
You put your foot right back into the side of the hip as you transition to mount. So as an example to say Matt was very technically transitioning into mount. But a lot of people, I've rolled against purples and brown belts that would just kind of haphazardly fall into mount and leave just enough open space for me to do it. But you put that kickstand back in, it's not like there's nothing. So it was a good example going, all this counterpunching works for people who are less experienced than you until you go against someone who's actually very technically proficient.
You have to show me what I did there because I'm trying to remember it.
Yeah,
now.
like you kind of tuck the foot in a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Things like that. Yeah.
Nice.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
I think this is really good.
Yeah. I hope everyone got value out of it.
I think we'll try to get some show notes. We've kind of written down a couple notes on our end of what we wanted to talk about. Yes. But we've talked about maybe like an end of the year thing where we'll take some episodes and we'll take some big core key concepts out of this.
Create some side effect commercials,
Yeah. Commercials. I'm visualizing that.
Of, scars, blood loss to the brain.
It has nothing to do with jiu-jitsu. It's just talking about it.
It's like that Deadpool commercial.
Yeah.
Like he had the whole thing like that.
I love that. We should do that. But yeah, we'll create some side notes for people to kind of get the core things. But I think a lot of some of our gems too is really in these conversations. And I encourage everyone to, you can leave your thoughts or comments of what concept really helped you. I love this idea of us sharing concepts, what's helped us as our jiu-jitsu journeys and grappling journeys, and just helping out the community. So if you want to leave a comment and let us know what concept has really helped you, or even just also have conversations with your fellow members after class one night and see how you can all collaborate together.
Yeah, I like it.
Cool. Sweet. All right. We'll see you guys next time.